Welcome, book nerds, to this episode of the JeanBookNerd podcast. For this episode, I'll be speaking with John Gray, author of The Desecrated, an ancient curse, a haunted morgue, boneless corpses and missing bodies, gruesome murders and centuries-old mysteries, and a complex young woman with a dark, painful past, determined to get to the bottom of it all. John Gray certainly knows what he's doing when it comes to the world of the paranormal and dealing with ghosts. So, you can rest assured with this book, it'll be no different. Let's get to it and hear more about his book. All right, book nerds, I'm now speaking with John Gray. Thank you so much for joining us today. Really excited to chat with you.
Thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here.
Awesome. Well, for those who may not be familiar with you, would you please introduce yourself for us?
Well, as you said, my name is John Gray. Most of my life, I've been a writer and director of films and television. And most recently, I've turned to novel writing, and I've just written my first novel, which just got published this past summer. And that's part of what we're here to talk about. Thanks.
Well, big congratulations before we get into the interview. I'm sure writing a book, from many people I've spoken to on this podcast, writing a book is no easy feat. So congratulations.
Thank you. It's true.
So as you said, we're here to talk about your latest work, your book, The Desecrated. Would you mind telling us a little about it?
Well, it's basically, it's a supernatural thriller. It's set mostly in a morgue, and it's about this sort of troubled young woman who's working the night shift at the morgue. And she's had a lot of tragedy in her life. She just lost her father. And when her father passed away, her source of financing for her college tuition went away. And her goal had been to be a doctor. And she was taking pre-med classes. So she's at a point in her life where she is just sort of taking a breath. And she's found a job in this morgue through a professor of hers at her school. And it's perfect for her right now because it's at night, she's alone. She doesn't care about being around the dead, doesn't bother her at all. And so for her, it's a way to kind of regroup and try to figure out what's next for her. And this sort of peace in her life basically gets destroyed when a young English movie star, kind of heartthrob named Trevor Price, is sentenced to community service at the morgue. And Trevor is this very, very irreverent, partying kind of guy who just brings a whole different energy to the morgue. And she believes that his antics in the morgue set off this old kind of ancient curse, and the morgue becomes haunted and becomes more seriously and dangerously haunted until she, in the end, has to sort of save the day. That's the Reader's Digest version.
Awesome. Well, one thing I want to ask you in particular is, I mean, you said your book is set in a morgue, which kind of makes sense because obviously, a morgue, dead bodies. But when people, a lot of things, think of, supernatural activity and, the book's entitled Desecrated, you would think like a haunted house or a graveyard or, a ship off, that's sunk off, like a ghost ship or, some kind of like tragic event or something like that. I'm curious, what was your motivation for choosing a morgue? Like what brought you to that?
Is that I personally find the idea of morgue, very, very scary and kind of weird. And also, I'm a big fan of Gothic horror. I'm less a fan of slasher kind of horror, although there's a fair amount of gore in my novel for sure. But mostly, I'm really interested in sort of the elements of Gothic horror. Haunted houses, this cemetery, an old morgue. So for me, that's an atmosphere that I really kind of like and want to, sort of live in, and think there's a lot of horror potential, a lot of scary potential in a morgue. And, hopefully, in fact, I had a TV show called Ghost Whisperer, and I was so enamored of the idea of morgues. In one of our seasons, we decided to build a morgue set that will become a regular set for our show that season. We're always having these happening in the morgue. So it's just sort of a familiar place for me, horror-wise, and something that scares the hell out of me. So I love to write about it.
When you were doing your research about morgues, did you learn anything that, people might find interesting, or, kind of like, oh, what most people don't know about, morgues that maybe is integrated into the story at all, or people might learn, I'm not sure how many people are interested in learning about morgues per se, but is there anything like that you find, or readers will find interesting and like kind of learn more about morgues in the process?
Well, I did do a lot of research. I spoke to quite a few people who worked at morgues, who ran morgues. And the biggest thing I came away with was just how kind of routine and sort of banal it gets for the people who work there. It doesn't take long for them to kind of lose the idea that they're working with dead bodies and people who were once alive. There are routines. There are certain things that have to be done. Photographs have to be taken. The body has to be weighed. The body has to be undressed. The clothes have to be put away in a certain way. All the watches, rings, everything that's on the body has to be accounted for. And so, it kind of becomes a dull routine in some ways, unless you're a morgue in a supernatural thriller novel. Then it's routine. But the other thing that I should really point out, which I think is kind of funny, what inspired this idea in the first place is back in 2015, Lindsay Lohan, in one of her many DUI trials or cases, was sentenced to community service at the LA County morgue.
Huh.
And she did it. She fulfilled that sentence. And I always thought that was just an amazing kind of thing. Like, who would think of that? Like, a judge has got a great sense of humor to come up with that idea. And what that must have been like for just the kind of ordinary people who work at the morgue. Suddenly, there's Lindsay Lohan with them. So that idea kind of just kept tumbling around in my head for a long time. And when I started really seriously thinking about it as a story, I decided to flip it and make it a male movie star who was kind of a macho, sort of guy, and a more troubled young woman who he encounters at the morgue. And it felt just a little bit better for me. So that's sort of like how the morgue came along in the first place.
Interesting. I didn't know that people having to serve community service at a morgue was actually a thing.
It's the first I've ever heard of it, but she did it. And I spoke to the guy who runs the LA County morgue and was her boss, and he said that she did great. The first day I think she came late, and he wouldn't let her in. He said, "Nope, you cannot be late. You'll start over again tomorrow, day one." And she came in, and I think she brought cupcakes or something for everybody. And he said, "No, you can't do that. Come back again tomorrow." So, it was a very tough kind of set of rules for her.
Yeah.
Said that she did great, and she did her work without complaint, and everyone seemed to like her. And just just one of these oddball things.
Oh yeah. Well, like you said, there's very set, strict rules, which makes perfect sense. I mean, got to keep everything clean, organized. I mean, yeah. So, one thing you mentioned is, for any of our listeners out there, like I said, who may or may not know you, you created a show, Ghost Whisperer, a huge TV show, and obviously that's set in kind of like the same genre as this book. So I'm curious to know for you, and I've asked other, directors, authors, people before, is when you work in different forms of media, all doing supernatural thrillers or sci-fi or horror, whatever, I'm sure it's very important to make sure that all the pieces feel like their own separate identity, and they don't all feel like they're kind of like the same thing. So coming from, the TV shows and the Ghost Whisperer and everything, to writing this book, what was your process for making sure that this kind of was its own standalone project and wouldn't feel like it's part of another world?
Well, I think it begins with just the characters. The characters, of course, are very, very different. Although the main character in Desecrated does have some kind of psychic abilities that are sort of latent that she's trying. She's not sure she really has them or not. That's really the only, I think, real overlap with Ghost Whisperer, except that they both have elements of gothic horror. Ghost Whisperer was a more complicated show than it would seem on the surface, because it was partly a gothic horror show. It was partly a mystery in which every week a case had to be solved. The onion had to be unpeeled. It was an emotional drama. We saw these characters kind of have an arc throughout the episode, and there were comic elements. And so a lot of the writing staff found it very challenging, because every episode had to hit all those marks. And so it was a little challenging in that way. This novel, I think, is edgier. It's a little darker. I think that the underlying mythology in the novel is a lot scarier, I think, than it was in Ghost Whisperer. But I think ultimately, I'm as a person who writes, I'm interested in characters. I'm interested in their journey. I'm interested in emotional drama, and I try to keep that alive no matter what I'm writing. If I'm writing a comedy or I'm writing horror, it all has to be about people that you care about. So that has to be the first priority, at all times. And so we prided ourselves on Ghost Whisperer in having fully developed characters, and which is one of the reasons why we always had such a great guest cast, because actors were really eager to play those roles because they were kind of juicy. And I've done this. I've tried to do. I hope the readers will tell me, but I've tried to do the same thing with this novel, populating it with really rich characters. Some of them are very dark and troubled and tortured. Some of them are just downright evil. Some are funny, but hopefully, even though you may not like them all, you'll come away understanding them all and feeling something for them.
Awesome. Well, I also think it's important whenever you read a book to have, it's always great not liking every character. I feel like that kind of gets a little more boring when you're like, oh, I enjoy all these characters, because then it kind of, there's no tension. There's no I read books and it's like, oh man, this character, they're such a, horrible person, but that adds so much dynamic for the story. So I think doing something like that's really important.
I think every writer wants that moment, in their book or their movie, where a certain character appears and the reader's like, okay, what's going to happen now? We know this guy's a son of a bitch. What's going to happen? So it's great fun to do that.
Oh, absolutely. I'm sure the coming up with the characters was a lot of fun, and all the backstories and the plot. I'm curious to know what your process was for that. I know a lot of writers that I speak to, sometimes they just start writing and just see where the story takes them, and they'll make decisions as they're writing. Some people, I've spoken to some people and they write out huge backstories and map everything out before they've even written the first page of the book. I'm curious what your process was for coming up with the characters, how much backstory, how much time you spent on that. Was there any personal experiences put in there, or any possibly any characters based on or taking inspiration from people in your life that for the characters?
Well, it was a lot of fun for me to do this, to come up with these backstories, because it's a luxury you don't often have when you're writing a script. Because normally you're writing, if it's a feature film, it's got to hit a certain time limit. You're not as limited as you are in television, but you still, it has to be within a 2-hour basically framework. If you're writing television, it's also you're not constrained. So while you can't just, go crazy and write stuff that just goes on and on, there is a freedom now to have some depth and to really explore these characters and explore their backstories. And I've always been envious of those writers who can kind of make it up as they go along, because it seems like it would be so much easier. But I can't do that. I really have to have the story kind of mapped out, and the characters, pretty much mapped out. I don't dot every I and cross every T, because I want to leave some room for magic, when I'm actually writing. So there's sort of like an art to knowing when I've outlined enough. Now I'm ready to start writing, and we'll see what else is going to come. but it's great fun. And in this we have one character who came from Turkey, and I've never been to Turkey, so it was great fun to research that. And this guy had been a grave digger in Turkey, and to sort of imagine what that would have been like and get all the research done. And of course, in the wonderful digital age we're in, research is so easy.
Oh yeah.
I'm old enough to know when I was writing years and years ago, and research meant a trip to the library, and you have to have your list with you, and you go to the library, you get all your stuff, and then take it back to write, and you realize, oh, I forgot this, oh, I got to go back to the library. So now, of course, it's just so great to just a couple of keystrokes and you're there. So I love the novel writing process. I guess not every aspect of it, but mostly the character part of it, where if I wanted to delve into a character's background some more, I could just go down this little alleyway and tell a funny story or a scary thing that this guy did or this person did. It was really kind of rewarding and great fun, much more liberating than having to write a script where you often can't. Sometimes you have a great idea for what could be in this character's backstory, and you have to save it to tell the actor because you can't really fit it in the script.
Gotcha. Well, something that you touched on earlier that I'm very curious to know about is writing for different mediums. I'm sure it varies, but I'm curious to know your take on, because not only for, like you said, on the length, because a TV show or a movie versus a book, obviously you have so much more time to get the story out in a book. But when you're writing, you wrote this book, I'm assuming, correct me if I'm wrong, that it was just you writing this, whereas on movies and TV shows, you usually have a bunch of writers. So I'm curious to know, how different was the process? Did you find it more challenging writing by yourself versus having other people to kind of collaborate with, or bouncing ideas off? Like, what was that like?
Well, that's a great question, because I came late to the world of series television. My first show was Ghost Whisperer, and I, up until that point, I had just written as a solo writer. I wrote movies and then I directed them. So I was sort of used to, for 25, whatever it was, years of that sort of thing. I write a movie, direct it, edit it, here comes the next one. So on Ghost Whisperer, my first experience with a writer's room, where we had like 8 really smart people in this room, and I had trouble with it. I have to be honest. I was so not used to it, and it was very difficult for me to sit there and sort of get all these ideas thrown at me by these really smart people, and every idea sounds better than the last one. Whereas I'm used to just having to be by myself at the keyboard, think things through, and take my time with it. So ultimately on Ghost Whisperer, what I did was a little unusual, I guess, for the series world, but I worked with the writers more on a one-on-one basis. We would convene the room if we had to break a big story, or one of the writers was having a problem with a story, and you had to have this sort of hive mind. But for the most part, I would encourage the writers to work on their own and come to me when they have something ready. And I was much more comfortable with that, or getting their material and then spending a day with it on my own, and then coming back to them. So I was kind of already teed up to write a novel, because most of my training had been just me in the room and the keyboard. So it was not a big adjustment in that way.
Okay, interesting. Roughly how long did it take you to write this book, The Desecrated?
I guess all in all, if you don't count the amount of years, the idea was just kind of percolating in my head.
No, I mean, just like from when you're like, all right, I'm going to write this, sitting down and, putting that first word on paper to the finish. Because I speak to a lot of authors and people, and some people are like, oh, I knocked this book out in 6 weeks. And some people I've spoken to, they're, oh, this took 3 years.
It took me about a year. It was about a solid year. There were some gaps in between drafts where I would let it sit for a while and then come back to it a couple of weeks later. But basically, I always wanted to write a novel. It's on my bucket list. And when the pandemic hit, I just thought, this is it. This is the time. All my film projects dried up. My TV projects dried up. We all have to stay home. And I thought, if you can't write a novel now, you'll never write it. So that's when I just buckled down and used the pandemic to sit home and write. And for that year, I spent writing it. Then it took about another year to get it, placed with a publisher and out there.
As you were coming to, um, as you wrote this book, did you ever find times where you're like, I gotta rework this, or how did you? Because as an artist myself, I always definitely run into issues of like, I'm a perfectionist. And I'm like, it can always be better. It can always change this. What if I do this? What if I do this? How, what was your process for just kind of picking an idea, sticking with it? Did you ever feel like you had to go back and like change things or rework things?
Absolutely, but the discipline that I sort of developed as a screenwriter, is that, and people think, oh, he's so disciplined, but really it's because I'm not very disciplined. I impose the discipline on me very, very carefully. But when I'm writing, I my goal is to get through the first draft, no matter what happens. I follow my outline and I just power through that draft, even though I know sometimes when I'm writing, oh no, this isn't going to work. That's not going to work now. But I know if I stop and try to fix it, or I go back and reread something, because the other thing, I don't reread. Wherever I start the night before, that's where I start the next morning, and I just go through it. Because if I start to read it, or I go back, I'll get lost in the woods. I'll start to tinker, and then, well, that's not right. This isn't right. And then before you know it, a couple of months has gone by, and I haven't made any progress. I'm still dickering with these. So I make notes as I go along, like, okay, this doesn't work, and here's why, but okay, I'll fix that when I go back. And sometimes I'll get like an amazing idea halfway through it. Oh shit, now I got to go back to the beginning. The whole beginning is going to change, but I get to the end of that first draft. And once I get that first draft done, then I feel like I'm unstoppable. Now, like I've done the hardest thing there is to do, even though I'm going to write, who knows how many more drafts. But that first one is the most difficult one to get to. And so when you get to the end, pop a bottle of champagne. This is great. Take a day off and back to it, and for me, that's how it works best.
Awesome. Well, now that you've got this book under your belt, are there any plans for more books in the futures, or any current plans for maybe a different series, or any other works that you have either in the pipeline now or up here in your mind that you'd like to kind of hint at for us?
Yeah, I am working on a thriller novel, not supernatural. It's just a straight out thriller. Very, very complicated, multiple points of views. It's going to be very challenging to write it. But if I can pull it off, I think it'll be really a fun, twisty thriller. And I've got some ideas for a sequel for the Desecrated, and we'll see if that's warranted. People will care about a sequel, but I do have some fun ideas for that. And so, yeah, I'm going to, I've been kind of outlining it here and there, and I've also been making short films, and I just finished a short film. And it's funny, it sort of goes back to the idea of telling a story in a limited amount of time, because the short film format is a great way to learn really economic storytelling. How can you tell? My shorts are anywhere from 7 to 13 minutes, and it's really the thing of like, how can you tell the story in as short amount of time as possible, but still make people feel something, still have very clear characters. And so it's very challenging and fun. And I'm just finishing up one right now. And my goal is to get to work on the thriller novel in the next few days.
Awesome. That sounds amazing. I know, again, as a filmmaker myself, I definitely know how challenging it can be to get, tell a complete story when you only have 10 minutes, or keeping it short.
Yeah.
Definitely have to keep only what's necessary, and there's always too much extra, so you gotta kind of sometimes you just gotta throw some stuff away just to keep that time down.
Yeah.
So
yes, exactly.
Well, where can our listeners learn more about you, and where is your book available for our readers who want to grab a copy?
Well, the book is available on all the normal platforms, Amazon and Barnes and Noble. You can go into a Barnes and Noble and order it. Um, and for me, I'm on Twitter at J Thomas Gray, Gray. I'm also my website is johngrayofficial.com, and on that website, you can see a 7-minute short film, which is basically a scene from the novel.
Ooh, very cool.
Yes, that you could there's a link to click on my website, and that's a lot of fun.
Well, I know what I'm going to be doing after we finish this podcast episode. I'll be jumping on there and watching it because the book definitely sounds really cool. Last question before we go, I'm curious to know what was your inspiration or reasoning, any particular, for coming up with the title? Because I know titles for books can always be, I'm sure, challenging.
Very difficult. I want to try to find something that was provocative and evocative, but that wouldn't tell you too much about what it's really about. But that would have a creepy, again, gothic, sort of sinister feel to it. And it has multiple meanings. There's the obvious ones, the dead bodies who are being desecrated at the morgue. But then when you read the novel and get to the final twists and turns, you realize that there's a whole other meaning to the desecrated as well. So it was just, it served a lot of purposes, and I was very excited when I stumbled on it.
Awesome. Well, I'm very excited to get my hands on it myself, because it definitely sounds like a book that I would enjoy.
Great. I hope you do.
So, well, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us. Very excited to read it. And again, big congratulations on writing this book and getting it out there, and can't wait to see what comes next for you.
Thank you. Thanks very much for having me.
Absolutely. Be sure to check out John's new book, The Desecrated, available everywhere, and I, for one, can't wait to get my hands on a copy. You never know where things will go in the world of the supernatural and paranormal, which always keeps things fun and exciting. That's all for this episode, so tune in next time to find out what fantastic book we have to share with you all. Take care, and John, any parting words for our listeners?
Hi, my name is John Gray. My first novel, The Desecrated, has just been published, and you're listening to JeanBookNerd.com.